Welcome back. So in this video, we're going to talk about how our culture is created in an organization. What is our origin? The first origin, the most obvious one, is going to be that of the founder and the founder's values. Whoever establishes a company is probably going to be responsible for writing the first mission, vision, and value statements, much like you've learned to do in the previous module. Okay? So you're most likely you are most likely to see the founder's touch on everything in that organization, even if that person has died, passed on leadership, etc. So that's really going to be the seed or the genesis of the organization. But the founder doesn't know everything, and the founder can't predict the future, right? So as the organization is going to deal with both internal challenges, i.e. inside the firm, how employees get together, how they deal with each other, all of the logistical challenges that happen inside of a firm, IT challenges, and so on. That's going to impact the founder's interpretation of what the culture should be. And then there's also going to be external challenges. Look, I think any of us that have been working during COVID all felt the impact that COVID had on organizational culture. If anything, I think for a time we were more open to being flexible working, a lot of these kinds of things. Any sort of stock crash, new technologies that come in, those are all great examples of external challenges. And how we deal with that forms an echo that impacts overall organizational culture. So that's another piece, right? So you got step one, kind of the founder values, and then as you progress, internal and external challenges. Now, industries will also have certain kinds of values that will seek their way in to the organization. So chances are, if you open your own oil company, even if you don't want to do it the way the other oil companies are doing it, you'll still be some sort of reflection of the way your competition is behaving. If you get into retail, chances are you will be some sort of a reflection of the way the other people are doing it, even if you don't want to. So there's that kind of influence, and let's dig into that a little bit more. With this industry demands, we actually have a theory called isomorphism. The premise behind isomorphism is that organizations in what we call an organizational field over time tend to look the same. Now you're probably wondering, what's an organizational field? Well, go back to the stakeholder model. Do you remember when the stakeholder model, I showed you how to draw a stakeholder map? You put the corporation in the middle, you put the primary and the secondary stakeholders out there, competitors, customers, etc. All of those stakeholders that you put in there are members of the same organizational field in many cases. At least the primary stakeholders are. Secondary stakeholders sometimes not. So for example, many companies have similar supply chain procedures. They borrow these supply chain procedures possibly from a common supplier. The supplier wants companies that are their customers to adhere to certain forms, certain norms, and certain bureaucratic practices. And so that impacts the way a supply chain works. Okay? That's what we mean by isomorphism in an organizational field. And there are three forms of isomorphism. There's coercive isomorphism. That means that there are external pressures, i.e. external challenges, that dictate the way that you're going to do business. Some of it could be, for example, laws and regulations imposed by a host country or an outside organization. Those laws will impact what is or is not appropriate behavior in an organization and will impact the culture. Great example, at least in the United States, sexual harassment is illegal. Across the US, you will not find an organization that condones sexual harassment. That's because there are laws against it, which is a form of coercive isomorphism. So any organization you go to, if the founder knows what they're talking about, they're going to try to keep sexual harassment out of that organization. That's coercive isomorphism. But another form of coercive isomorphism relates to customer expectations. So in retail, most retail companies value customer service. Why? Because customers all across the world expect to be treated like kings and queens when they go into a shop. Organizations that have bad customer service that work in retail will quickly find themselves out of business. Okay? Remember I talked about those other kinds of organization culture? Think about oil companies. They all have a safety-oriented culture A, because it's the law, right? And B, because customer groups would probably be upset if they found out that employees were getting killed, wantonly while working on oil rigs. That's another form of coercive isomorphism, because there's both laws that emphasize safety and there's customer expectations. They want to support companies that are doing the right thing. You also have memetic isomorphism. Memetic isomorphism is another source of culture. So let's say you decide to start your own company like a coffee shop. Well, you're not really sure how the organization culture will look because you don't want to be like Starbucks. So maybe you look at like Wendy's, like a fast food joint, and you look at what they're doing and you implement that in your own organization. You like the Wendy's cultures, you want to be like the Wendy's of the coffee shops. Memetic isomorphism means you mimic organizations that are very different than your own and incorporate some of their values, their technologies, and their techniques. That's another source of organizational culture. And then last but not least, oh, and by the way, another form of memetic isomorphism. Think about what consultants do. They're like honeybees, right? They go from flower to flower. Honeybees go from flower to flower, spraying pollen. Consultants are always a big part of forming organizational cultures whenever they're paid to do consulting assignments, and they tend to bring in best practices in industry, even for companies that are very, very different. So that's also another source of memetic isomorphism. And then finally we have normative isomorphism. People that are educated in certain majors, in certain degree paths, and in certain universities all tend to look, act, and think the same. Think about it. Let's say you hire a physician. A physician has a medical doctorate, an MD. There is a certain expectation that someone who has gone through medical school will do no harm, will not hurt somebody during the course of their medical practice because they were trained not to do that. Accountants also, for example, are trained to adhere to certain kinds of accounting practices and procedures. So when you hire an accountant, you expect them to act and behave in a certain way, and the accounting culture, the medical practitioner's culture, that's going to impact your organizational culture somehow. And so that's what we call normative isomorphism. So these are different kinds of ways that organizational cultures are created. Next, we're going to talk about the maintenance of organizational cultures. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this video, so hit that thumbs up, that's a like button. Definitely hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, and definitely type your comments down below. Thanks.